Steigerwald Lake, Franz Lake, and Pierce National Wildlife Refuges here at the mouth of the Columbia River Gorge. And I started my role, I guess, with the Ridgefield complex. So we are part of the same complex as Ridgefield. So all of the staff for Ridgefield National Wildlife Refuge are the staff for our gorge refuges. We do have two separate friends groups, so you'll learn about the Friends of Ridgefield in a minute from Elena. But I started my time with the complex at Ridgefield, volunteering at their contact station. Then I got a job there running their invasive plant program over the summer. And then the volunteer coordinator position opened up at Steigerwald. And Steigerwald was the first place I visited when I moved to the Northwest, and kind of just fell in love with Steigerwald. And just being able to get so close to wildlife on the trail was so exciting to me. And so when the opportunity to work there came up, I jumped on it. Didn't have a lot of volunteer coordination experience before that. So I've basically just learning by mistakes for the last 6 or 7 years. So as we've engaged volunteers in the past, it was always really like the low-hanging fruit kind of thing, the people who already loved the refuge, the people who came all the time. And it was pretty easy to recruit those volunteers because they were already pretty passionate about the site. And now during COVID, it has given us a pause to reevaluate our programming and how we engage and how we can purposely engage new communities. And it's all very new to us, and especially this new technology heavy format that we're in now. We're redesigning our volunteer onboarding process to cater to this new virtual environment we live in. And so it's been a great learning process the last 2 years, and looking forward to sharing what we've kind of come up with.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Glad you guys are here. Stacia.
Great. My name is Stacia Honnold. I use she, her pronouns, and I am with Washington Trails Association, or WTA. I'm the Southwest Regional Coordinator there. This is my 5th year doing that. And for those of you who are unfamiliar, WTA is a statewide nonprofit, and we focus on advocacy, education, and trail maintenance around the state. I'm in the trail work world, so all the things I have to share are from the trail work volunteer world, even though we do have volunteers in advocacy and education realms as well. So that's what I can talk to you about today. We have a super robust volunteer program that's been in place since about 1970 statewide. So it's a pretty big volunteer program. Just last year in 2021, which is, like Kaylee was saying, kind of a smaller year for us because of COVID, we had over 3,500 total volunteers across the state, over 507 of whom were youth. And those 3,500 volunteers contributed almost 160,000 hours of time. So we very much rely on our volunteer program to get the work that we're tasked with the Forest Service and all of our land management partners. We rely on our volunteers to get the work done that we said we would get done. So we're very grateful to them. And we have a semi-tiered way that volunteers can interact with us, from just coming out for a day to people who are volunteer crew leaders for us and go through very rigorous training and sort of retention series, we'll call it. So we have a whole bunch of different ways that people can engage with the trail work world, and we very much value and very much rely on our volunteers, and would love to talk to you about how that works for us.
That's awesome. Wow, what amazing numbers. Thank you for sharing that piece, for sure. Elena, why don't you go ahead?
Hi, my name is Elena Tinoco, and I am the volunteer coordinator for the Friends of the Ridgefield National Wildlife Refuge. I've been with the Ridgefield National Wildlife Refuge for about 5 years. Started off working with the Youth Conservation Corps, and then a position opened up for habitat technician, which I took for a year, and then for the past 2 years, I've been in the volunteer coordinator role. I really enjoyed working with volunteers, and the outdoor work was a little bit too much, so switched over to just full-time volunteers, and that's been really fun for me to learn these new skills, and working closely with Jared to try to update our volunteer program and seeing how we can better engage our community members. And it's been a really cool learning process. I'm excited to be on this panel with all you.
Awesome, thank you. Elena, we're having just a little bit of trouble hearing you, so you might want to just check your audio a little bit. And I know I've learned from experience that sometimes you might have to turn off your video for your audio to work if you're having Wi-Fi trouble, but we'll get through it.
It only happens when we're in big presentations, we found out.
Well, thank goodness this isn't a big presentation. You're just talking amongst friends today. Awesome. Well, each of you gave a really great background. And Michelle, if you can move us to the agenda slide. Like I said, there's a lot, we could talk about this topic for days, but there's some really specific, really great lessons learned from this team in the Southwest Washington region. So we want to cover a few topics. We want to try to wrap up by 2:15, so we still have time for questions at the end. But if you have a burning question, just go ahead and let us know, and we'll try to get to everybody's questions as we move through. In panelists, feel free to chime in as you want, or I might pick on you gently. But let's talk about just first that big picture. You all have volunteer programs, and I know that we have some folks in our meeting today who may be considering having a volunteer program. You've highlighted some of the value that the volunteers provide, but anything else you want to add about how important the volunteer program is to your organization?
I'll go if no one else does. So it's been really interesting to me going from volunteer coordination in the nonprofit world to a government agency. In the nonprofit world, it was because, you know, we needed volunteers because without them, we would just cease to exist. We didn't have the funds to you know, hire, we had a 100-acre natural area and didn't have any money to maintain it. So, I mean, we literally would have ceased to exist without volunteers. For the government agency, that's not the case. And so the volunteer program is less about what do we need to survive and more about what does the community want to engage in. And also for us, it's kind of one of our biggest tools for getting to know the community and the community getting to know us. Otherwise, you know, when we go to build a new road and, you know, need to go to someone's property to expand the right of way or something like that, if they've never worked with public works, we're just this big, scary Death Star county organization, you know, coming out to get you. And so we've really found that the volunteer program is a really great way for the community to get to work with our staff and get to know our staff and find out that our staff are neighbors and we're residents too. And it kind of helps break down that intimidation some people feel about working with a government agency and collaborating. And it's a really great way for us to get feedback from diverse community members to make sure that we're really serving the community the way we need to be, because that's why we're here, is to serve the community.
Thank you. And Stacia, I was about to say, you talked kind of big picture for WTA on the whole state. What are you finding here in the Clark County area in your volunteer experience on the value that they provide here in Clark County?
Yeah, it's the same thing in Clark County and everywhere in Southwest Washington. We literally cannot do what we are set out to do without our volunteers. You know, our big picture aim is to connect people to nature through stewardship. And our volunteer program is how we do that. And it's also how we, like in Clark County specifically, I don't know, I'm trying to like limit myself to Clark County here, but it's hard for me to turn off like all the Gifford Pinchot National Forest and other stuff that we do. But it really allows us, one, to introduce people to stewardship if they haven't done that before ever. And we have a variety of different work party options, like half-day work parties for people that are closer in. That's where Clark County and City of Vancouver actually come into play a lot, as we can do some of our closer work parties that allow people who have other obligations and don't want to spend a whole day on trail to come out. And then we have like longer day work parties and multi-day work parties that are not in Clark County. Those are our national forest ones. But it's really an entree for a lot of people to giving back to something that they use a lot, the trails and parks near their houses. And then that's a portal for them to maybe get more involved or find, move into the advocacy world at WTA or become a volunteer crew leaders for us. But just zooming out from Clark County a little bit, we could not do, like we have all these grants and contracts with the Forest Service and other land management partners that say that we'll do a certain amount of work on their trails per year to help support their lack of funding. And like I said, we just could not do that without our volunteers. And I'm very grateful that people are willing to spend days and days doing backbreaking labor at times, and yet they seem to love it. And I feel, maybe I'll stop there and see what other people have things to say or questions.
Oh, those are really good points. Anything else to add there?
Can you say the question again?
Sure. Just we talked a little bit about what the value of volunteers are for your program, and hitting on the topics that literally we can't get the work done in the nonprofit world without the volunteers. What else would you like to add from the Refuge side there?
Yeah, so I went down rabbit holes in my brain of thinking things, and then I was like, oh no, what was the question again? Yeah, I mean, originally the value of the program was very similar to, or at least at Steigerwald Lake, it was very similar to Kaylee of just getting the work done. The staff is so small with the Refuge that really staying on top of invasive plants, we need all the help we can get. And so really that has been the focus for a long time. We are part of the Urban Refuge program, and that program is one of the main goals is to build a conservation constituency and to reach out to communities that were previously historically excluded from nature. And so with that in mind, we are changing the way we approach the volunteer program to be more inclusive, engage new audiences, to build those connections with folks that hadn't previously been to the Refuge. It's also just focusing on the people more than the projects. A lot of our regular volunteers really depend on our volunteer opportunities for their personal health, both mentally and physically. That's why COVID was so hard on us, to continually tell our regular volunteers, like, no, you can't come out, like COVID, we don't want to take that risk. But I started to feel like that was hurting them more by keeping them home than it was to bring them out and put them on BlackBerry miles away from each other. But which is what we've kind of been doing for the past year. But yeah, that is definitely a focus of ours now, is that humaning that we do on the refuges and in nature.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it sounds like there's an education theme woven through all of this. Here's a chance for people to learn from experts while they're out doing the backbreaking work or the pokey work. And it's maybe a way for folks to get the information that they may not be able to get otherwise. So it's really cool that there's these opportunities. Elena, anything else to add on that piece? I mean, the education on the refuges there's just so many places you can go with that.
Yeah, for sure. I think Jared put it beautifully. Just like the new direction that the refuges are trying to go with, engaging people and working toward diversity, equity, inclusivity, and different trauma-informed practices. And I've been thinking of different instances of when people from the community would come out and volunteer for habitat restoration, and even especially the kids, when they come out, they'll see worms and be scared at first, and then as soon as like one of the staff or volunteers, they come up and say, oh no, check this out, like they're actually really cool, they're nice, and then they just like have a great time. So it's really cool seeing the different perspectives people have of what nature around them is and the way that they interact with it. It's really exciting process to be a part of.
Well, that's why I like to do that kind of stuff too. I want to see all the critters as
Yeah.
well. That's
Yeah,
fantastic.
getting to work with the professionals in the field alongside them, you get to learn so much of like, oh, what's that bird? You know, someone can tell you, they can
Yeah.
identify it by the sound, or they can tell you why a plant is important.
Hmm.
Differentiating natives from invasives. It's super fun.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'm the volunteer who always asks 1,000 questions. So
Yeah,
that's
those are always welcome.
well, that's great that going into it knowing that education is the value and getting to know the people who love the spaces and then can carry your message back to their neighbors is great. Let's talk a little bit about onboarding. So in setting up the structure of your volunteer program, and especially now in this digital world, I know that the county has used program like Volgistics in the past. Let's talk a little bit about the structure of the program and how do you recruit and get folks engaged in volunteering. I'm going to call on one of you. Stacia, let's start with you because your website is so robust and it's so easy to read for volunteers if they want to just do a 2 or 3 hour thing versus the backcountry or the camps. Let us know kind of how your system's set up and how do you bring people on board?
Yeah, when you're asking that question, I was kind of trying to think back. I mean, our programs have been in place for so long that we do have we have a lot of people who already know to check the website for volunteer opportunities. So in that sense, I feel like we're in sort of a privileged volunteer position where a lot of people already know to find us. However, what we've really been working on is trying to reach out to people who don't already know about WTA or people who are looking for something but don't know what it is yet. And that's, I feel like, our challenge right now is how to move beyond, like our regular volunteers who are like on the website all the time looking for every single volunteer opportunity. And people who are like, oh, I want to give back. I'm not really sure what that should look like. What sounds interesting to me. So that I feel like that's our kind of my current struggle right now is just how to balance that. I don't know how much nerdery or in the weeds we want to get to about this, but I've been experimenting with like posting a work party on our website. And then on the back end, I can hold spots for people who have a certain number of volunteer days with WTA already. So if I want to highlight, if I want to post a work party that's a beginner friendly work party, in the old days, I would post it and it would be filled immediately with all of my regular volunteers and I would miss my target audience. But I've recently been able to hold spots for people with like 0 to 5 volunteer days already or 0 to 2 days already. And that has allowed me to kind of tailor some of the more entry level work to actually entry level people, not just people who are psyched to do anything they can. So that's one thing I was thinking about. Does that start to answer your question?
Yeah, that's fantastic because you and I have talked about those high school students who need those community service hours and they don't know where to go and they don't want mom to do it for them, but they got to get the hours in. So that entry level piece in it's so your website is so clear to understand and get that set up.
Oh, I did also mean to say that I try to be very intentional about like when I post a work party, and this all happens on the website. I don't know how other people structure their volunteer opportunities or how you sign up, but I try to be very intentional about what the work or describing what the work will look like. So, instead of saying we're going to be doing tread work, I try to say something like, we are going to be using digging tools to dig in the dirt and flatten the surface or, whatever is appropriate. It's like trying to give people an actual visual of what they might be doing so that people aren't just like signing up and getting into something that's way above their heads or so that they're reassured knowing like, yeah, that sounds like something I could do. And I'm trying to be really specific about like the hiking requirements and like all the sorts of things that people might have questions about. I try to put that on our websites so that people can make their own best decisions when they see it.
That's great. Thank you. Kaylee, let us know a little bit about yours because I know you also use your website pretty well. And Karen asked a question about how else do you communicate with new people?
Yeah, so when someone Googles, I want to volunteer Clark County, our webpage is going to be the first one coming up because that is the name of the webpage. So for me, it's been really different because compared to the nonprofit world where people didn't even know we existed, people know we exist. We send out mailers about paving in their neighborhood. We send out notices when we're going to be doing construction at a park near their house. So for me, it's less about getting people to know who we are and their volunteer opportunities with us, and more about reducing any hesitation people have about volunteering with a government agency. Because we are the government, and a lot of times people only interact with government agencies through enforcement actions. There can be some hesitation, especially to some historically marginalized communities, to engaging with us, because the public doesn't understand that a parks department does not have a direct line to the governor's office or whatever. To them, if you're the government, you're the government. And so for us, it's a little bit more about just creating that kind of welcoming, good experience. And what I have found has been the best way to do that is, I think someone mentioned it in the chat, to connect with different community groups and really form a relationship with their group leader. Because a lot of groups look to, their church group leader, their club leader, their neighborhood association leader. And kind of if that person kind of vouches for volunteering with us and says, hey, we had a great time, it was a great experience, so come join us next time, then people are more inclined to do that than just random government employee telling them to come volunteer. So for us, that's kind of what we've been doing to go out and get folks, is just doing that relationship building. Another big piece for us is earned media. It's free to send out a press release via flash alert, and we have been utilizing those more the past few months, and it's gotten us a lot of earned media. So when we had an open position for a volunteer park host at Louisville Regional Park, I sent out a press release, and we got over 400 applicants, including from states like Montana, California, for a volunteer position. Granted, it's kind of a cool volunteer position if you like scrubbing toilets, but I think it really spoke to, we've been working so hard on just building that earned recognition, that earned media. And we're fortunate too, to just have programs people want to participate in. People want to help out at parks. They love their regional parks. And so I think that was a big part of it too, is we're just kind of lucky. And then the last thing I want to mention is, in terms of like onboarding, we've really tried to make it easier for folks and reduce some barriers. And I know everybody loves in person and wants to go back in person, but that is a barrier for folks, that, to get a babysitter and go to an in-person training on this specific day at this specific time. And for some people too, who maybe have disabilities or other, personal challenges, it can be intimidating to sit in a room full of like really gung-ho people and take this training. And so COVID gave us a really great opportunity to experiment with different online trainings. So we've used Google Earth and Google Slides and Google Forms to make online orientations and trainings. And what we do is incorporate quizzes into those trainings, so they can't go on to the next section of the training until they get all the quiz answers right. So it's not about, we're scoring you and giving you a grade. It's more about making sure they understand the information we need them to understand. Excuse me. And also maybe, giving them a chuckle or two along the way. And folks have really responded well to that. There's definitely still a desire for some in-person training, But a lot of people have reached out and said, like, this is really great because I can do this on my own time. I can send it to other people in my group. So we have more than one group leader who knows what's going on. So that has been a big change for us for onboarding that we've seen a lot of success with.
Wow, that's really great. And I think the online tools themselves have come a long way in the last 2 years to make everything much easier, including maybe somebody can also talk about a little bit about tracking your volunteers. So once you are onboarding them, do you have them log into a system that they can track their hours? Let me know a little bit about what programs you're using for that piece.
So I can take that because we are changing the way we do that now. And I'm sure Kaylee and Stasia both have super fancy systems, but we don't, or we didn't. So previously we just used spreadsheets. And so we had about like 60 regular volunteers. So it was kind of sort of easy to just track their hours individually on a spreadsheet. But we are trying to be more cohesive as a Ridgefield complex now. And so it's difficult to do annual reporting for volunteers when we have volunteers that volunteer at each of the 4 refuges, and splitting that time up on spreadsheets on the different sites and totaling the volunteers across those spreadsheets. It was a pain. And so kind of one of the ways of onboarding new volunteers and covering our needs was I just decided to randomly ask our volunteers if anybody knew how to make a database. And turns out one of my regulars, she retired from doing that work. She made volunteer databases for the Humane Society and all sorts of small groups in the Northwest. It's like, what? You didn't tell me this when you were digging holes? And so found that out, and she has been volunteering to create us a volunteer database for the last year. And it is through Microsoft Access, which is, I do understand that's not like the best way to track volunteers. There are definitely better volunteer management tracking, but this one's free and we're having it custom made for us. So that's been incredibly helpful because of just the dynamics of our specific volunteer program. It's really helpful to have exactly what we need tracked. And so it's very new to us, but we've been able to host it on SharePoint through the Fish and Wildlife Service. So it's a secure system, and we're able to, Elena and I can both edit it from where we are at our respective sites, which we hadn't really been able to do in the past. So that's been really great.
That's awesome. And that just hits on a really important point. Those conversations that you have while digging, and we found this when we all met out at Steigerwald recently, is somebody might have a hidden talent that you didn't know about that actually might fill one of your needs, especially for those folks who might have a disability and can't necessarily get out in the muck or on the backcountry trail. So offering those other positions that might help you with some office work or marketing, et cetera. That's a really great point.
I want to just put in a plug, what Jared was saying about having spreadsheets and then moving on to a different database. You know, we've been around a while, so we have like a database that works really well for us. But I just want to say our neighbors to the south across the river, Trail Keepers of Oregon, are a relatively newer trail organization. And until recently, they were also using like Google spreadsheets to keep track of everyone. And I really just want to say, like, you know, just because other organizations use a fancy database doesn't mean that you have to. Like, a spreadsheet does work really well until you're a certain size, and then you'll realize like, okay, that's not enough anymore. So I think sometimes there's like this conception that you have to have like all these fancy systems to engage volunteers. And yes, there are fancy systems and they do a really good job, but you don't need them to start with, I think.
That's a really great point. Thank you for pointing that out. And I know the school districts also use some Google, they're on Google systems and use those across networks where there may not be another platform that works best for people. So thank you for that. Let's also talk a little bit about engaging staff with your volunteers in training. Some folks have lots of volunteer experience and just like, oh, I know what I'm doing, and off they go, you know, maybe the safety training. But let's talk a little bit about engaging with your staff in the training to help those volunteers be successful. Kaylee, you hit on this a little bit. Is there anything else you want to add about other training that you make available for folks?
We did work with CVTV to produce a training video for our Adopt a Road program. And that has been really great because volunteering on roads is the thing that keeps me up at night. Because a lot of the folks I work with on the roads crews, or even our roads engineers who have spent, 20, 30 years working on roadways, have some really gruesome stories. And so volunteers out on roads always gives me lots of heartburn. And so during COVID, when we couldn't have people together in a big room to do a training, and Adopt a Road's only part of my program. And so I didn't have the capacity to do an in-person training for each individual group leader who wanted to join the program. And because the county and the state couldn't use corrections crews to pick up litter during COVID, and the litter problem got really bad and really obvious, I was just getting inundated with people wanting to do litter cleanups. I still felt like, in spite of all those things, just my online training module wasn't enough, because since this is way more dangerous than, pulling weeds in a park, I really had to make sure people knew what we were asking of them and that certain things aren't optional. And a video was really the best way to do that. A video with a really good script behind it. And, really descriptive. So we worked with CVTV on that, and that has been really great. I've actually found I've had to make some additional videos to just show people how to, fold and unfold some of the equipment. Some of the buttons are, tricky to find on some of the road sign stuff. So we've been using a lot of videos, and, I hope to eventually be able to offer, maybe like a once a year training or like refresher course for folks. But for now, these are working really well. And I do just want to put the plug out there. I know there's a lot of kind of like rogue litter cleanups going on right now on roads, and they're super dangerous. I see people out there picking up needles with their children who are wearing flip-flops. And yes, I've seen photos, and people who are picking up litter on the side of the highway and they're not wearing high visibility vests. And it gives me an immense panic attack. So if you encounter anyone, see anyone, a friend or family member on social media or whatever who's doing that, please connect them to me, because even if it's not a county road, I can connect them to someone who can give them a high visibility vest. And also there are some really interesting laws around what you can and can't do near roadways. And a lot of the enforcement agencies are headquartered in the Vancouver area. And so if volunteers don't work with us, they don't know what rules they need to follow, and they could be fined and held personally accountable if one of those enforcement officers just happens to be driving to their office and sees them on the side of the roadway. So anyway, sorry, that was a little off topic, but it is like my biggest issue right now is these rogue litter cleanups on the roads. So please just help spread the word so we can make sure people stay safe.
Thank you. Well, I mean, that hits at the heart of the conversation, right? You have volunteers, safety has got to be of utmost importance as they're navigating to the site across uneven terrain, using sharp tools, especially. Let's hit a little bit on this topic. Maybe Stacia, I'll pick on you for a second. When you have kids come to a site to volunteer, and how do you tailor any specific trainings towards the younger audience regarding safety, or what to expect on their journey with you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I feel like I should back up from that for just a second and say we have a very super stringent safety protocol in place for all of our work parties. And we have, for those of you who are unfamiliar, our work parties, we do trail work, and they're led either by staff or they're led by volunteer crew leaders who have had extensive training from us, and they have to recertify every 2 years, and they have to be wilderness first aid trained. And we have all these highly stringent requirements, and I'm always impressed that people want to do it to lead crews for us. So we have that like very intense safety background, just coming from a trail work perspective, because like Jane said, we do have sharp tools, and we do work frequently in very remote locations where an accident would be potentially catastrophic. So I guess all of our training comes from that lens, like a safety lens, a tool safety lens. And then we, a few years ago, added a mental and emotional safety component to that, that has really helped improve the all-around safety, because if everyone feels welcome and able to voice any concerns, then we are collectively safer. But as far as working with youth, we do have a requirement in place currently that youth be, excuse me, 10 years old or older to come out on work parties with us. And that I have mixed feelings about that, because I do feel like we've had younger kids and they're great. But all the people who lead our work parties are aware if people are coming on the work parties who are youth, and they can either, if they're not familiar with like, how do I tailor work to a young person, then I will support them. But we're really good about giving, smaller people tools that they can handle, like not the really big, heavy tools, and like tailoring the tasks to what they can do safely. We do also require that people who are 16 or below 16 come with an attentive adult, so that we can make sure that someone is taking responsibility for the smaller people. Does that answer your question? You're looking for something else?
Oh, that's great. First of all, we are trying to connect kids and families to nature. So knowing that there are opportunities for kids to get out there. Alina, how about on your sites, working with families and kids when they come out to visit the refuge?
See if my audio holds up. So with my experience, we have had usually groups of young students come out. So whether it's a 4th grade class or Cub Scouts, that's generally my experience with bringing youth out to the refuge. We usually have several volunteers on hand to help supervise the activities going on, and usually parents will accompany, or teachers will accompany the students and young kiddos as well. So that just by having the extra staff and volunteers to help tell people like what to plant and like where to plant it and how to handle the roots properly, that usually works to just explain the processes. But I'm not too sure about the safety concerns that we usually have when we bring students out. We keep the areas usually cleared out to be like free of sharp plants like blackberry, or they're not working with dangerous tools. We provide them with gear like gloves, and safety glasses are probably some of the most important things, just to protect little fingers and eyes. And for the volunteer paperwork, those under 18 need a parent or guardian signature. And generally with habitat work, we've gone with students over 15 are okay to be accompanied without a parent.
Oh, and I think we might have lost your audio, Elena.
Oh, I just stopped talking.
Okay, sorry. It's kind of on the breakup point. Awesome.
Okay, is it still rough? Because I can stick to the chat and type in things.
Okay. It's kind of spotty here and there, but
sorry about that.
No worries, no worries. Well, I appreciate all the information in the chat too. That's great. And I want to be respectful of our time. We've got about 20 minutes of conversation left. So let's see if we can get to some of the other topics here. And I really, Stasia, you alluded to the mental and emotional health, which we had training about this before COVID. So even after COVID, the work that we did with Delana Meyer was so important, and it's now even exponentially more important. So let's talk about the training and the support that you have for your teams and your volunteers regarding that emotional mental health. Trauma-informed care is another term that's used in the industry, et cetera. Talk a little bit about what your agency is doing to help people feel safe and welcome as they visit your volunteer events.
So I can go. We are working directly with Delina. She has a contract with the Fish and Wildlife Service, and so a lot of the work she is supporting us in right now is our volunteer program, and so she's helping us with, I guess, like everything right now. I mean, she's reviewing most of our documents through that trauma-informed lens, and telling us what to take out that's not necessary or what we need to add in. She's given us suggestions, like in our volunteer database, for each volunteer, we should get like feedback preferences from the volunteers so that we know how to best provide that feedback to them. And recognition, how like we've noticed in our volunteer program that a lot of our regular folks don't really want anything. Like what they get out of volunteering is that feeling of being on the refuge, and being out in nature. That's all they need. And so to recognize them publicly is not the best. And so making sure that that's all built into our volunteer database is something that we're adding. And then, yeah, we're just building that into the culture of our program, being open, having open communication. And that's what Stasia touched on, is that emotional safety through voicing concerns and how open we are to receiving that feedback. And I've been doing that with my volunteers for a long time, and it's really great how open and honest my regular volunteers are. It tends to get a little critical sometimes. It's like, whoa, everybody, we're doing things right, don't worry. But I love having their honest feedback on things, and when they're confused by something, they don't worry about telling me that they're confused, and that's really healthy for our volunteer program, and it has shown by the retention of these long-term volunteers throughout COVID.
Awesome. And Jared, I'm gonna just ask one follow-up question, because you made a really great point. And we talked about this in our planning meeting. When Delana is helping you review your printed material, whether it's a flyer or it's language that's going to go on a website, give us an example of something that came out of that conversation. Like, oh, we usually say it this way, but if we put the trauma-informed lens on it, it actually might read better if it says this. Can you give us an example? Putting you on the spot.
Yeah, the thing that's stuck in my head is more about formatting. From my brain perspective, I like having information. Like, I like just bullet points of information. And one of the things that sticks out with me is that that doesn't work for a lot of people's brains. It doesn't stick in with people if they just see bullet points. So and we don't have a ton of examples right now because we're still in the middle of doing it. But that's one of the things, is just getting all the information that we think we need, and then putting it in a way that's more easily digestible by folks. And I don't know if Elena, you have another example from our work with her.
I put in the chat some of the words that we've used in the past, like manual, have certain like connotations or meanings associated with it, of kind of like, you have to do this. It's like, rather than having like formal strict rules of like, don't do this, don't do that, don't do that. It's, you can do this, these are the things you can do. Just being more gentle with the wording, and just makes things more inviting and welcoming overall.
Thank you for that, Elena. That was that's what we talked about in our meeting, is that proactive language, as opposed to don't do this, don't do that, do this, which you go to some parks, not in our community, but some parks, like, don't ride your skateboard on the sidewalk and don't do this. But it's like, oh, you want to ride your skateboard, head on over to this place, or that positive reinforcement for folks to feel welcome and still be able to do the things they need to do. That's fantastic. I'm looking through our list. Anything about else about structure of your organization and how structure supports the success of your volunteer programs?
I'll go because this was kind of something we redid because we found that staff had really bad experiences with the volunteer program and did not want to work with the volunteer program. And we didn't have a lot of repeat volunteers. And I think sometimes it's hard for volunteer program managers because they don't want to say no to people. They don't want to turn anyone away. So when someone says, oh, okay, well, I can't do it the way you want me to do it, but if you let me do it like this instead, then I'll still volunteer for you. And I think it's really easy for volunteer program managers to say, oh, okay, because they don't want to turn that volunteer away. But what had happened is when I came on board, then I inherited this volunteer program where we had literally dozens of people doing whatever they wanted and however they wanted, including things that were not necessarily legal or not necessarily building good relationships with neighbors of some of our properties, endangering the environment and some mitigation sites. And so, I mean, I think all of us who work with volunteers have fallen into that trap at one point or another. You just say yes, because you don't want to, you don't want that volunteer to say, well, fine, I'll take my time somewhere else. But that really ends up creating this volunteer program that you can't control. And that is going to cost your organization in the long run. If it doesn't cost you financially or legally, it costs you in staff buy-in, because it's staff who have to go in and fix those issues or respond to angry neighbors. And so then staff looks at you and says, God, why do we even have a volunteer program? All they do is make more work for us. So for me, the structure is super important and can be the hardest thing for a volunteer program manager to do. And so what we did to kind of define our structure is, first, we needed to define the goals and purpose of what our volunteer program was. And so for us, that was community engagement and increasing capacity. We have less than half of the amount of parks maintenance staff than similar parks departments, are similar size parks departments around the country have. So for us, the volunteer program was really about getting to the things that we didn't have the staff capacity to do on a regular basis, like litter cleanup, graffiti removal, things like that. Second, you need to define what your barriers are to having a volunteer program that meets those goals. So if your volunteer program isn't meeting those goals, why? And so for us, that was, lack of communication or buy-in from staff. So staff weren't being consulted about projects. Road staff weren't being consulted about adopt a road. Parks maintenance managers weren't being consulted about things being built by volunteers in the parks. And so defining those barriers and kind of addressing those was key for us. And then third, use the first two to just define the structure of your program. So once you know what your goals are and you know what your barriers and challenges are, then you can kind of create a program that has the structure that it needs to help meet those goals. And for us, what that meant mostly was really well-defined volunteer roles and lots of opportunity for staff input when we were creating those volunteer roles. And so now we have kind of these bins, I guess, or categories where a volunteer comes to us and says, I want to help out in parks. And we say, okay, well, you can do the Adopt a Park program, or you can do this, or you can do this, or you can do this. And if they say, none of those work for me, I want to do this other thing, we just say, oh, we're sorry to hear that. Here's a list of other organizations you might want to check with. And so the structure, I can't emphasize enough, structure is so important to creating a well-functioning volunteer program that provides more value to your organization than, cost to your organization. And yes, Elena, totally put it right. We can't be everything for everyone. But I think a lot of us who work with volunteers, it's just our nature. We're people pleasers, we're helpers. That's why we do the work that we do. And so sometimes it's hard for us to set those boundaries, but you just absolutely have to, and you have to stick to them.
And gently remind each other what the boundaries are for those of us who are not good at holding our boundaries, because I just want to help, right? That's really good. Anybody else want to chime in with structure? Once again, Stasia, you work with a very large organization. Roughly how many staff do you have, and how often do you have to meet to coordinate the volunteer piece?
In the Southwest, we have 2.5 staff. So it's me and my supervisor, and then we hire a summer crew leader, which is again why I say like we cannot do what we do without volunteers, because there's only 2, sometimes 3 of us. But I actually had a few thoughts about structure and just kind of setting up expectations, because that's something that I think we do pretty well. And what Kaylee was saying about like having to say no to people, I think we've really structured our volunteer training system to be quite good. And I think a lot of that has to do with like, we can't have a staff person leading every work party. So we want to make sure that the volunteers who are leading our work parties are very much on board with what we are trying to accomplish and are totally capable of carrying out what we need them to, as though they were a staff member. So we don't just let people be volunteer crew leaders, like it's an application process, and they have to show that they are interested in interested in working with people, interested in becoming better at recognizing microaggressions and interrupting exclusionary behaviors. They have to take a leadership training. Actually, all staff has to do this too, who's crew leading, but have to take a leadership training at least every 2 years. Some people do it every year, and it covers those kinds of topics like creating welcoming spaces and interrupting microaggressions, giving and receiving feedback. We have a whole emergency response module that they have to take every 2 years, most do every year, about how to respond to an emergency, like what our protocols are. And it's actually, this is what, like, it's a pretty intense requirement. The training is through WTA. When we first set it up, it was with the help of outside consultants. And then since then we brought it in-house, since we've done it so many times for so many years. But it's, it's a pretty stringent requirement that we have for volunteers, and we don't say yes to everybody because we want to make sure that the volunteers we bring on for those roles are going to uphold our mission and be create a welcoming environment for all of our volunteers. So that's one structure we have. And then another thing I wanted to highlight is that we do, if there's ever anything that comes up on a work party for us that didn't go exactly as planned, we have a thing that we call incident reports. So it could be like someone gets injured, or somebody says something that is racist, or somebody has a near miss, like they don't get injured, but they could have if something had gone wrong. We ask all of our crew leaders to file incident reports, and then we use those as scenarios in our trainings. So we're consistently like getting information from the field, taking that information, plugging it into our next incarnation of training, and making our training better and better, and more responsive to what we're seeing. And even though it seems really stringent, our volunteers have really loved that we invest this much effort into them. I think a lot of them feel like, wow, I'm really like personally growing as a leader. I'm personally becoming better able to interact with different kinds of people. And we've gotten a lot of really positive feedback from having a fairly, I think, stringent application and reinstatement process for being crew leaders. So yeah, I'll stop there.
No, that's fantastic. Thank you for that. And showing the value of volunteers, that you value their time and their willingness to come back time and time again. And that recognition piece. Yeah, a lot of us don't want a lot of recognition, but except the hard hat, of course. That's fantastic. I want to be really respectful of the time. Michelle, if you could forward the slides to the resource. We did put together a resource slide. Michelle's been putting some of the links for these agencies in the chat box, and we'll go ahead and grab and put those in there as well. So if you want to reach out to Kaylee, And maybe each of our panelists can also put your emails in the chat if you are so comfortable, in case people have questions for you. So the first one is for Kaylee with Clark County Public Works. The second one is for the Gorge Refuge, the Gorge Friends, with Jared, WTA. Stasia, I grabbed that off the main WTA page, but if there's a more specific way for people to reach out to you directly, go ahead and put that in the chat as well. And then more information, if we didn't mention it before, I apologize, but the Lower Columbia Nature Network is funded for Michelle and I to participate through the Fish and Wildlife Service. We're in year 1 of a 5-year commitment. So we do want to recognize all the resources that are available through the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and there's some of their links to the Refuge 2020, and their websites are getting updated, so they have more information. So if you haven't visited their websites, please go check those out, because there's new information coming on board from the Fish and Wildlife Service as well. At this time, Michelle, I'm going to ask you to unpin or unspotlight our panelists and open up to the group. Unless there's any other key topics we want to hit. There was so much information that we've covered so far, but I want to make sure that we hear from the other partners in our call today and hear about other advice that they would share from their programs, or any other questions that they have for the panelists as well. I'm going to change my screen around here.
I like how Kaylee's like the star of the show now. All I see is.
Yeah, and if you need to change your view settings, it's up in your upper right-hand corner there. Awesome, because I know we have some folks from the city on the call, and I apologize. I missed Aaron in our introduction as being new to the network meetings. So I'm going to pause this for a second. Aaron, you want to introduce yourself and welcome to the Lower Columbia Nature Network. I apologize.
Hi, I just started with the Fish and Wildlife Service in January. I work in ecological services, and my position is called Portland Urban Conservation Coordinator. And I'm kind of figuring it out as I go. There wasn't someone, this is a position they created when I joined. So I'm really excited to be here and learn from all of you. And it's really interesting to hear about all the volunteer programs you'll have going on, especially on the refuges. It sounds really great.
Awesome, thank you. And I do apologize. And I'm going to pick on Suzanne. If you're on the call here, Suzanne, because I know you also use a lot of volunteers down at the Water Resources Education Center, and even maybe in some of the programs that you run. So how are things going with the city? Are you hosting in-person volunteer events yet?
Yeah, hi Jane. Yes, we have been hosting some volunteer events. Most of them have been doing some garden work in our native plant gardens, and also beach cleanups around Marine Park and Wentler Park. And I have to give credit to Ashley and our AmeriCorps members, Sierra, for leading those programs up and coordinating them. And we're still doing small groups. So because there's just only a couple of us, we've still been doing small groups of 12 to 15 people. But I think people have been appreciating the opportunity to get out and yeah, help clean up the gardens and get some litter off of our beaches.
Great to see you. Thank you for coming today. I'm looking through our list. Who else has joined our call here? I know that other people. So now I'm going to pick on Chris Potter because she's in a school setting and using volunteers out at your garden, Chris. And knowing that school gardens is one of the topics that we want to hit on with folks. How is it going? And are you able to have volunteers back on your school site yet?
Not really. We can have some of the parents who are vaccinated. We still kind of are following a vaccine mandate. And so all of our volunteers have to have proof of vaccination. And at this point, we are not able to have people who are not enrolled in school. So that means no younger siblings. So that limits the number of parents that can come onto campus as well. So right now, I'm just doing some things with students during class hours.
Okay. Thank you for that. And of the panelists, I forgot to even ask, where are we at with COVID protocols? Are you still requiring like vaccination card proof and all that kind of thing? Negative tests, I don't know where folks are, like, do you still have to show a negative test result, or how's that COVID response going?
Ours is dictated a little bit by Forest Service because we do a lot of work on Forest Service land. So we still require vaccinations. However, our mask mandates are gone. As long as we're outside, people don't need to wear masks.
Yeah, we've pretty much opened up. Same thing on federal land, no masking. But we're opening as slow as we can, just as we get back into the swing of things. And our capacity is still fairly limited because most of the staff are still on telework status. So they're not even on site yet. So we're still moving out slowly, but we're allowed to carpool again, which is huge because access to different parts of the refuges are challenging without a vehicle, without a truck. And when everybody had to drive individually, that made a lot of our work very challenging. So we're getting back to that. We have a mask mandate for in vehicles until April 18th. But after that, we're close to back to normal. It's exciting.
Awesome. Okay, with a few minutes left, I have to ask one question because what an extraordinary 2 years. Hopefully we don't ever have to do this kind of routine again. But everybody's pivoted so much and adapted so much. What is one thing that's come out of the past 2 years that you're just like, we are so grateful that we now have this new way of doing something or a new tool? What's a lesson learned that you've come out of this last 2 years like, yep, this is going to make us so much better moving forward?
Honestly, virtual meetings. I know some people hate them, but we're exploring moving forward with hybrid because we've found for a lot of our community open houses, participation is way, way, way up. And I can speak to just personally, like my husband and I used to, after work, we don't want to at 7 o'clock get in the car and go and drive somewhere for a neighborhood association meeting. But if we can just turn it on like while we're cooking dinner, we'll do that. And we've heard at a lot of our open houses that we've seen the demographics of participants shift. We have a lot more younger people joining us for open houses now. So it's not, 95% retirees anymore. And kind of younger people are joining boards as well. And we've also heard from older folks or folks of any age with physical mobility challenges or who rely on public transportation, that it's way easier for them to attend a virtual open house than to try to figure out how they're going to get to an in-person location. So that's something that I am just crossing my fingers and begging organizations to keep. I'm a member of a couple different groups like this one who sent out polls like, hey, should we ditch virtual altogether and just start getting together in person? I'm like, no, I don't have time to drive into, Portland or Battleground and go to this meeting, but I really want to participate. So I just really hope, even as people start meeting in person, there's an option to continue participating via a virtual meeting platform.
Yeah, I think we're lucky that we will have to maintain hybrid moving forward because sometimes we just got to do it virtually because You guys are everywhere and it's fantastic. But we want to get outside into nature as well and walk our walk. What else have you guys learned?
Totally agree with that. The ability to meet when we couldn't before. We've done that with the 3 friends groups across the Portland, Vancouver area. So we never met with Friends of Tualatin before the pandemic. It's just they're too far away. We don't cross the river if we don't have to. So now we meet monthly with them and the Friends of Ridgefield. And it's so good for brainstorming and working together for common goals. And then the other big one is DEI, to focus on DEI and in the work we do. And thanks to Katie and all the work at the Intertwine with those cohorts, gosh, our organizations are just drastically changing our focus for the better. So really appreciate that, Katie.
Katie, you rock. And what about the Intertwine? What mega lessons have you seen come out of the past 2 years that you're like, whoa, this is going to make us so much stronger in the future?
I love that question. I was putting it in the chat. Jared, thank you for saying that. I love hearing the impacts of the equity cohort program. I couldn't agree more with the access and virtual aspect of our work, especially we're a regional coalition that serves the Portland and Vancouver region. And so as we look at like our annual summit that brings together around 350 of our partners every year, finding a location over the last 10 years that we've held it doesn't ever work for 75% of our coalition. And so while we missed a virtual or an in-person kind of social hour aspect, it's hard to think that we'll ever go back to completely all in person because of the access it brings people. And yeah, that's really wonderful. On like a organizational health side, it's been cheaper. COVID has hit us hard, and hosting some events online has been cheaper for us, and we've been able to be successful coalition conveners and community builders throughout the pandemic, even as our budget has gotten smaller and is hopefully growing back. But that's been like a very real benefit to going online for us too.
Yeah, really great point, cost savings. And I'm sorry, I don't miss trying to park in Portland. It stresses me out, although I do miss going to the zoo. So if you ever happen to do it at the zoo just once, that would be awesome. Okay, we have time for just a little bit more chat out. What else is going on with your programs for volunteers? And I didn't even pull up the event calendar. I should pull up the event calendar. Who's doing something super fun that we should all go to? Pull up my Padlet here. Michelle, can you share the Padlet for the events? Let's see what's coming up. What are you all doing?
I can mention something that's not an invitation to you all necessarily, but we're working with Mauricio Valadrian, who spoke with us 1 month a while back, but he's going to be engaging some of our non-traditional audiences or previously excluded audiences at Steigerwald before it reopens, so that we can get their perspective on what Steigerwald has to offer, and create a more inclusive video of like a welcoming back to the refuge. And so it's a really exciting new direction that we're taking with his support. And it's just something I hadn't really thought about prior to COVID. So again, with everything we're learning and the benefits of the Urban Refuge program support, yeah, we're moving things forward in a really good direction.
That's great. And if you didn't have a chance to meet him when we were out planting at Steigerwald, make sure you bump into him because he is just awesome. His energy is just contagious. So that's fantastic. Can't wait to see those pieces.
All right. Can you see the Padlet there? Somehow it booted me out. I'm glad it didn't cancel the meeting.
No, and I'm sorry, I have to cancel most of these March ones, so I'm in here cleaning it up. But We've got some greenways and sensitive lands things going on in Vancouver, the Oregon Maple Project in December. That's way out there. But we also have the Intertwine Alliance partner coffees coming up too. So we'll ask our other.
I think that's in the wrong spot. I didn't realize.
That's right.
That's in April. That's soon, folks.
Here, we'll move you down here. Dink, there. There you go. Awesome. Okay. All right. Well, like I said, both Padlets are open. So as events and activities come up that you want us to share, and Michelle puts those in the newsletters and in the blog, let us know and we'll get those out in our communications. Michelle, anything else from the communication standpoint to let folks know about? Are you still looking for blog ideas?
Yeah, we're always looking for blog ideas. I know we want to do kind of a partner spotlight. So if you want to be on the top of the list of an agency or organization for us to kind of send you a Q&A, just tell us more about what you do and how you connect communities to nature and how you work to break those barriers down. We'd love to feature you.
Oh, you muted.
Sorry. There was also a survey, Friends of the Columbia Gorge survey. So I'll just post that in the chat as well. I know that that closes today. We put that in the email that if anybody has a chance to fill that out before they sign off for today, I know I would appreciate it.
Yeah. And so it's yet another year that we don't have an in-person Earth Day event down at Salmon Creek Klein Line area. So hopefully next year we'll be able to all get together and celebrate Earth Day together. So I would like to thank all of our panelists for your time today and your expertise in so many great ideas. And I know we didn't hit everything, but if people need to follow up with folks, please reach out to each other and connect. That's why we do this, so that we can all support each other in the great work that you do. Any last questions for anybody in the call today? Okay, I'm going to put out one more request to you. If you haven't been to our website recently, Michelle, if you can add the link one more time in the chat for our website. We are looking to update it as often as we can. I know there's some pieces that we kind of populated with our first flush of information. Now we need to go back and refine. So if you ever see anything that you think we want to add to the website to support you, if we do not have your logo up there, I sincerely apologize. Let's get it up there. Send us your logo and we'll get that added to the webpage as well. So we just want to make sure people have more information. Michelle will post the video from today's session up there for folks as well. Awesome.
Thanks all.
Okay, I say it every time, but you all rock. I'm so impressed with all of you. It's just like, I get to hang out with really cool people doing really amazing things with beautiful backgrounds. So thank you for that inspiration to like, let's go outside. Why are we talking? Thank you so much, you all.
Yeah, thank you.